Have you ever been in a meeting where someone shares an idea and before anyone else can respond, the leader shuts it down? Either they present their own idea or they pretend they were listening but then change the subject? Well, this leader wasn't great at active listening. Research shows that leaders who practice active listening are much better at building trust and engagement throughout their team. In this video, I'll show you how to listen like the best leaders. We're going to talk about verbal cues, nonverbal cues, powerful questions, and informed responses. Hi, my name is Andrew Beard from BeardExecutiveConsulting.com, where we build better businesses through building business leaders. Let's dive into our topic today. First, let's define active listening. Active listening is when we're listening to truly understand what the speaker is sharing and not just trying to respond quickly. Active listening is much different than just hearing because it involves empathy, openness, and curiosity about what the person is actually saying. The first way to show that you're actively listening is through using verbal cues. Now, you might be familiar with people that say a lot as you're speaking to them, and that doesn't really show that they're listening. They might be hearing, but they could be completely distracted. Instead, you want to use small verbal cues like, oh, interesting, tell me more about that. Or you might even reflect parts of what they're saying and repeat them back to them. Maybe something like, wow, great, thanks for telling me so much about the marketing plan. Could you dive a little bit deeper and explain to me how we're going to get this out to our team? By using those verbal cues that are more purposeful, the person that you're listening to feels heard and understood. The next part we want to emphasize about active listening is the nonverbal cues that you share. Now, different research has the numbers different, but at the end of the day, 70 to 90% of what people understand in a conversation comes from those nonverbal cues. We want to be doing things that show the listener that we're listening even without responding vocally. It might be a simple nodding of the head. It might be having eye contact or putting down a phone, or if we're on a virtual meeting, making sure that the person knows that we're not reading an email or typing something different, but we're really focused with them. Additionally, you might think about your posture. Things like closed arms might show that you're closed off and aren't interested in listening. So showing a more open posture can show that you're really listening, as well as leaning slightly forward to connect with whoever's speaking with you. Now let's relate this back to trust. Imagine that there's two leaders, and one is listening to someone who's bringing up a problem with their team, and they're multitasking, they're showing how busy they are, they're maybe writing down some other notes or looking at their cell phone when it rings. And the other leader has cleared everything off their desk and is just focused on the person. Who do you think is going to build more trust with your team? I know where I vote. Now, the third part of great active listening is about asking good questions. Great listeners don't take it in, they look to deepen the conversation. The key here is to use open-ended questions. An open-ended question is going to ask for the person who's speaking to share more about their topic instead of just a yes or no. Is it raining today? Would just be yes or no. That's a closed-ended question. But open might be, hey, tell me a little bit about the weather and what we can expect to see today. So open-ended is going to initiate a stronger response. Now, with those open-ended questions, we want to avoid leading the person down a path. Questions such as, well, don't you think we should do this? Are intentionally leading them in one direction and aren't really about listening, but is about getting our agenda on the table. Instead, we might say something like, hey, can you tell me more about that? Now let's think about the scenario of a leader who is talking with one of their direct reports. That direct report didn't finish what they said they were going to do this week. When the leader hears this, they could go in two different directions. One might be a more judgmental, harsh, saying, well, why didn't you finish this? That can lead to blame and the person feeling a little bit like they've been judged and it's hard. Another question that the leader might ask is, well, tell me what challenges came up as you were working on this. This allows them to be a partner with that person instead of just being the judge who's frustrated that the person didn't finish the project. Notice how that great question that the leader asks creates more trust between them and their direct report, all because they spend some time to listen and ask a great question. Let's review our first three steps before we go to the next one. So first, we're going to provide really strong verbal cues to the person that we're listening to show them we're listening. We're also going to align those with our nonverbal cues like nods and other gestures to help them know that we're there. Finally, we're asking really good questions so we understand what is going on with the person. Now, that may be enough. Sometimes the person you're working with is going to answer their own questions or solve their own problem just through that process. But when a response is necessary, this is the time. So step 4 is you're going to provide an informed response to the person you're speaking with. The tendency here might be to share what you think right away, but it's still good to remind them that you were listening. So you might start by saying, I understand that this has been a frustrating project to you. Here's a few thoughts that I have about how you might approach it. A key thing to remember at this point in the conversation is to be precise. You've done a great job listening to them, and what you don't want this to become is an exercise in them listening to you. And remember, if you need to pause before giving a response, you're welcome to do that. It might be a few seconds to collect your thoughts, or you might ask if you could come together the next day and talk about it more because you need time to collect your thoughts. Before we're done with this topic, let's talk about some common mistakes that leaders run into. So often, leaders are wanting to solve the problem and they jump in before they even understand what the issue is instead of asking questions. Another common mistake is interrupting other people's sentences. Make sure they're really done and remember that some people pause longer than others before they give their answer. Sometimes, especially when people get defensive, we're only listening to respond or defend instead of to understand. Always start with understanding the other person. And a final mistake that some folks make is assuming what they're going to tell you before they're even done. If you've ever caught yourself rehearsing your answer before you've fully listened, you might be guilty of this one. I know I've worked with a lot of leaders that this was a struggle for. Let's wrap up our conversation on active listening. Today we've talked about not only the skills that are important to be an active listener, but also why it's important. At the end of the day, you want to build trust with your team, with your colleagues, and lead to a more engaged outcome. I encourage you in your next one-on-one meeting or your next team meeting, see if you can listen more than talk and practice some of these verbal and nonverbal cues as well as some great questions before you make a response. And as always, if you feel like you'd like some additional support, feel free to reach out. I'd love to support you and your team. Thanks so much and have a great day.